Great. So we are now at the PFAS updates point, and I'm just going to tee it off for John, mainly because this is a conversation that just emerged, and this is yet another key piece of the US EPA puzzle when it comes to their PFAS strategic roadmap / action plan, which we know exists, and you can locate it at epa.gov for 2024. This was part of the existing Biden-Harris administration, just moving forward with PFAS and addressing PFAS, which we know are those forever compounds resistant and very challenging emerging contaminants of concern. The science has changed dramatically since we first started talking about perfluorinated compounds in this forum. And we just, as you all know, received word after announcing, starting last year, more seriously announcing that promulgation was coming. On April 10th, 2024, EPA established and promulgated final national primary drinking water regulations for the 6 PFAS. This is an interesting juncture because recall that MassDEP, alongside with a few other handful of states, decided to actually start our research and review of existing data back in the 2015-16 era, which culminated in, again, going back in the time machine here, promulgation of groundwater and soil standards for PFAS by the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup in 2019, followed by drinking water standards that were promulgated by the Bureau of Water Resources Drinking Water Program in 2020. And as such, Massachusetts, again, as some other states also, we've been a national leader in addressing PFAS contamination and setting these promulgated standards both for the cleanup program and drinking water program at the time, again, using the science that was available to us at the time, to the tune of 20 parts per trillion for the sum of 6 PFAS. That was back in 2019 for the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, in 2020 for the drinking water program. But it just didn't stop there. I think we continued our research, and some states now, with the advent of this new April 10, 2024 announcement, are just now in the process of starting to do their 3-year routine sampling. Thereby, this is all in flux. The intention by US EPA is to arrive, and they have arrived at a national level, that should harmonize drinking water treatment as necessary across the nation. And therefore, we are now in the process of currently reviewing the EPA recently promulgated federal standards and basically ensuring that we work hand in hand with the Bureau of Water Resources Drinking Water Program to follow the same science and ensure that our numbers are harmonized with those of the drinking water program so that there is no concerns by citizens that actually receive tap water through their public water supplies or private wells, to ensure that there is harmony between those two programs and a common endpoint. The reason why I'm saying all this and sort of previewing it for you is because it's been a month and 6 days since that announcement, and we have, as part of the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup's plan, first align the staff that will be running point with any and all PFAS conversations. I've already introduced you to John, and John has been asked to start compiling questions both internally and externally. We're receiving quite a number of them when it comes to creating policy, amending regulations, updating guidance to match up with the new science. So I'm just looking for your patience. I'm looking for your understanding that we are moving as fast as we can with arriving at concrete answers. But I think, again, this being the first advisory committee meeting and the first opportunity for us to listen to your specific concerns or at-large general concerns, that would be chiefly my request for today, that we utilize this time to hear about your concerns, and with a proviso that we will be using the meeting, office hours meetings, to start on a rolling basis, answering questions that are posed to the Bureau. So a lot of that, but I wanted to again open the floor for John to provide us with some, where are we now in terms of what we know are affected universes out there of regulated areas. And then we will come back to the fold by way of soliciting questions and looking for you to provide us with some direct input on areas that you see need to be resolved quicker, more quickly, rather than being relegated to a second tier. So with that, thank you. John, if you would be so kind as to provide us with a presentation.
Yes, Millie, thank you very much for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm John Ziegler. I am the new BWSC PFAS coordinator, statewide coordinator. I've been in this position since mid-March, so just a little over 2 months now. As Millie mentioned at the outset of the meeting, this was a new position that was created within the Division of Policy and Program Development, which is led by Ken Mara. Just in the way of background, I just want to give a brief background about myself. I've probably worked with many of you, but I'm sure many of you I haven't met in my years at DEP, but my educational background is in geology. I have over 30 years environmental experience. 20 of those 20 plus years now have been with the department, starting off working on the GE Houstonic River site in the Berkshires, and then followed by a lengthy time as the audit section chief in the Western Regional Office. And then more recently, I was the acting deputy regional director of Bureau Waste Site Cleanup, and had this opportunity to take on this role addressing PFAS issues, and I very much look forward to working with all of you to address these issues. I also just want to mention Amita Naik, who is an environmental analyst, again, in the Division of Policy and Program Development, working with me on PFAS issues. And then, of course, the 4 regional PFAS leads that you see here. And I'm sure any of you who have worked on a PFAS site within the regions are familiar with these folks. But again, feel free to reach out to me, to Amita, to any of the regional folks with questions regarding PFAS. And we're working diligently to address those issues. So next slide, please. So let's just talk about PFAS standards and where we are right now. As Millie mentioned, and I'm sure most of you are aware, EPA announced its final MCL regulation on April 10th of this year, just a little over a month ago. There are some notable differences from the Massachusetts MCL, being that EPA has an MCL for individual PFAS compounds, where the Massachusetts MCL is a sum of the 6. We also in Massachusetts include 2 PFAS compounds that are not included in EPA's MCL, that being PFHBA and PFDA. Although EPA includes 2 PFAS chemicals that are not within our PFAS 6. Those are GenX and PFBS. The other notable difference is that EPA has introduced the concept of a hazard index for a mixture or 2 or more of certain PFAS compounds. So as Millie mentioned, we have been working and are continuing to work on evaluating our PFAS standards. And those standards, certainly the MCL will be revised to be at least as stringent as the EPA federal standard. What this means regarding the MCP, the MCP adopts the state MCLs as its standard for drinking water exposures. So what that means is certainly the GW1 standard and the reportable concentration for drinking water exposures, or the RCGW1, will reflect changes to both EPA's federal standard and the Massachusetts MCL when that is revised. In the meantime, and as of today, the MCP cleanup standards that were promulgated in December 2019 remain in effect. I could have the next slide, please. There was one other significant rule recently adopted by EPA, and that was the listing of PFAS and PFOA as CERCLA hazardous substances. The effect of this is that it brings CERCLA enforcement and cost recovery tools to the forefront for EPA and brings them more in line to where we've been now for several years. It also provides some regulatory certainty for federal sites required to perform response actions, and provides clearer understanding of toxicity risk levels and cleanup standards. It's also going to require that actions at federal sites that may have been, well, it will require actions at federal sites that may have been reluctant to move forward while EPA was finalizing its standard. And then finally, it provides EPA with the ability to revisit sites affected by PFAS. I could have the next slide, please. So this is just a chart showing notifications that waste site cleanup and LSPs are addressing by year. This universe includes reportable conditions that where we've been contacted where there's been an exceedance of a reportable concentration. It also includes referrals from the drinking water program for affected public water supplies, where waste site cleanup is currently conducting source discovery efforts. And finally, it includes imminent private well sampling or private well sites where waste site cleanup is mitigating imminent hazards. So shown here is, I believe, 155 sites in this universe. Roughly 28% of these sites are within EJ areas, and nearly half of them include impacts to environmental media, but with no known impacts currently to a drinking water resource. I could have the next slide, please. And one of our priorities, as many of you know, is addressing imminent hazards in private drinking water wells. I don't think this is news to anybody, but the imminent hazard number is currently equal to or greater than 90 parts per trillion. DEP has a statutory requirement to address imminent hazards either through enforcement or response actions. Our current process, if we have not yet identified a PRP, or the PRP is unwilling or unable to conduct response actions, DEP takes the following steps, including we'll arrange for bottled water, followed by installation of a point of entry treatment system, and then ongoing sampling and maintenance of that system for some period of time. So currently, MassDEP is maintaining 50 point of entry treatment systems and providing bottled water at 31 sites across the 4 regions. And if I could have the next slide. So I just want to finish up by talking about what we are doing and some next steps. As Millie mentioned at the outset, we are coordinating with our other bureaus and ORS regarding the federal MCL. So we are certainly in communication with the Bureau of Water Resources Drinking Water Program. I mentioned source discovery work in the chart. We are continuing that, and that is occurring in all 4 regions, as well as mitigating imminent hazards at private well sites. We are in the process of of considering or looking at amendments to the MCP regarding PFAS because of the MCL change. And so that work is ongoing. And we have plans to update a couple of guidance documents. The PFAS sampling and analysis guidance document was last updated November 2023. We're looking at that. There are certain areas that I have identified in looking at that we may want to provide additional information in the areas of source identification, fate and transport, sampling protocols, and data analysis, just as a few examples. So that's in process. And then also providing a specific PFAS Q&A. And I know Ken mentioned these both as priorities. The Q&A, as Millie mentioned, we are receiving and compiling questions from folks external to MassDEP, also the DEP regions. So if any question is posed, I'm asking it be sent to me. And please, if you have questions, please forward them along, and we can see if that's something we want to include into the PFAS Q&A. And then also just considering the document that the LSPA presented in December 2020 on PFAS questions. And then finally, we are and have been developing the CAM protocol for EPA method 1633. That method was finalized by EPA, I believe, end of February this year. And that is still the recommended method for waste site cleanup site investigations, where you're sampling environmental media that does not include drinking water. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to add that bullet number 1 still obviously remains the critical bullet, because whereas this is a federal rulemaking that MassDEP needs to comply with in order to maintain our delegated status, correct, for Massachusetts, it is imperative that we understand where BWR is going. As John has accurately described, we harmonize our GW1 numbers to match the MCL. And again, with the help and assistance of the Office of Research and Standards, we are making decisions relative to PFAS occurrence across the Commonwealth, hence why John illustrated how 2 of the PFAS don't quite resonate with what we see in Massachusetts, but given that it's an MCL, we have to obviously match and adopt the federal standard. But then we have our unique situations in the state that necessitate the need to develop and promulgate PFAS that are occurring more frequently, or at least identified through sampling of the PWSs across the Commonwealth. And that actually gives us an insight as to what is actually out there in the public water supply. So there's also, not to forget, Office of General Counsel is also serving a very important role. I do know that there was a final rule that EPA issued separate and apart, but related on CERCLA enforcement discretion policy. So that is something that, we're watching. We're trying to continue to work under the auspices of counsel and to best understand, and this will probably come through the PFAS Q&A as a question, what sites are we focusing on, liability issues, et cetera. It is complicated, and we need to give ourselves time and space to better understand, what is the focus. And obviously the focus continues to remain on parties who significantly contributed to the release of PFAS chemicals into the environment, including parties that may have manufactured or used PFAS in the manufacturing process. So industrial facilities, et cetera. So we will continue to carry out this conversation with the assistance of OGC. Let me just then take a step back and just refocus on Steve, Sharon, and then Lisa Camp up next for comments. Thank you.
Yeah, I have two quick questions for John. One is, what is the status of the department promulgating surface water sediment standards for PFAS? And then secondly, and I understand it's subject to the concentrations, but for the 50 POET systems that the department's maintaining, how are you finding those in terms of effectiveness and frequency of carbon changeouts?
Yeah, let me address the POET question first. I think the data that we've gotten back so far on the POETs has shown that they're very effective at treating PFAS. The changeouts have been, I mean, a lot of these systems have lasted quite some time. I don't have specific numbers. I know in one instance, there was a different activated carbon used. It was a coconut-based carbon that didn't last as long. I think we started seeing breakthrough within a year, but the others I think have lasted in many cases several years. But that's something that we can look into further and provide additional information on. Regarding sediment and surface water standards, again, those are conversations that we're having. I don't think we have anything specific on that currently, but those are considerations currently.
Yeah, I can definitely offer that is on the list of things that we are collaborating, not only with the Office of Research and Standards, but also working with the Department of Public Health. And even beyond that, also fish consumption advisory levels is another area that we are focusing on together with the Department of Public Health. I do know that DEP in 2022, this is specific to surface water, so forgive me, not sediments, but just to kind of round out the picture here, Steve. We have the 2022 collection of surface water samples. 5 water bodies were sampled, and DPH also has resampled those particular water bodies with an angle on beach scenarios to kind of determine in exposure through swimming and evaluation to ascertain safe to swim levels. So that is anticipated for the summertime. So we are collaborating, and again, with the advent of these new toxicity values and research, we're working really fast to ensure that is incorporated into decisions for PFAS specific to various media. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and Steve, just back on the POETs, for maybe one of the next meetings, I can get additional information that looks a little bit closer on performance of those POET systems that we are maintaining.
Okay, yeah, I'm very pleased on how long they seem to be lasting, given the effectiveness of carbon and so forth. So that's great news.
Thank you, Steve. Lisa?
Thanks. And by the way, I have a lot of poets I'm dealing with, and I would concur that if it's just PFAS you're dealing with, we've been seeing, carbon last year and a half, something like that. The issue is if there are other contaminants that can make the changeouts much more frequent. There's a different contaminant like 1,4-dioxane and things like that. It accelerates to every quarter that you need to do a change out, which is very frequent. And then I also wanted to bring up that we've had to deal with radon as well. So if there's radon at high levels in the water, which certain parts of our state really have very high levels of radon naturally in the water, you also have to install a radon system before you can install the carbon-based POET, because otherwise it would aerate and actually make exposure worse for the radon. So unfortunately, I know too much about this. I just had a couple questions primarily about, I guess, schedule and process for these PFAS amendments, which, this is a little different because the first time around in 2019, we preceded federal MCLs. And so the process was that, wayside cleanup was working with drinking water. And then we had the hearings where the public could provide comment on the proposed standards. And then basically, like Millie said, there was a harmonization of what was being enacted for a Massachusetts MCL and then what our GW1 standards were. This time, we don't have a choice on the federal MCLs. So for those 6 constituents, I think we're aware that we have to be at least as stringent, and I'm hoping that we'll just be consistent, but I guess we'll see. And then we had those 2 other PFAS that were previously regulated that aren't addressed by the federal MCLs. And I don't know if DEP is contemplating adding additional PFAS to the regs. So can you just sort of describe just conceptually a little bit, are the hearings really going to be about anything that is not a federal MCL, which we don't have a choice but to implement? And could you give us any sense of rough timing on when you expect this process to start?
Okay, so here's my take, and I can certainly tell you that after a month and 6 days, our programs are already in the process of setting up meetings and collaborating. The drinking water rule, just through its nature, and again, recall that some states decide, this is a national drinking water rule. Some states actually decided to kind of wait and see. Some states actually moved ahead and established their own PFAS, which that's where MassDEP is similarly situated with other states. And in light of the various sort of 2 ends of the spectrum, what the EPA has done is said to the drinking water program, especially all the delegated states, you pretty much have 3 years from rulemaking to get yourself in the process of responding to this MCL, now national rulemaking. And I don't want to speak for the drinking water program, but I can tell you we've always been in the spirit that we're not going to wait 3 years for that to happen, and more specifically, bring it at home to the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup. We are in the process of currently analyzing what are the segments of the MCP as it exists today, since it was promulgated on March 1st, 2024, the new MCP, which are the areas that would be mostly affected through this new national rulemaking. We always have the option to go ahead in front of the drinking water program if that is something that we deem it to be appropriate. But what I want to tell you, Lisa, and all advisory members and the public, is that we already know where the EPA has gone. We do know those numbers. Enforcement-wise, and I guess what we go by is what we have on the books right now. But we do understand, all of us now, that with the passage of these numbers, we need to either meet or beat those numbers. So I would just say, within the next month, we are already finding ourselves, DEP internally, in the coordination room. We have established a date to start sort of exchanging notes in terms of this is how it works for us. These are the numbers. We have issues like imminent hazards. We have CEPs. We have significant risk. We have all these various endpoints, things that maybe are related but not necessarily specific to the drinking water program. Therefore, we will be bringing to bear our priorities, just as the drinking water program will be bringing their priorities. They have a whole bunch of other things that they need to work with that are not necessarily in our Bureau of Wayside Cleanup world, but again, are related. They are regulating public water supplies. They have a process. They have public notices that go out. They have a lot longer time frame for ensuring that their infrastructure is serving water that's safe and pure to fit, only just through the nature of the drinking water program and how the timing works. But we may have an opportunity to accelerate our response actions, at least, with numbers that are more aligned with the current science. And therefore, that is the opportunity that we're seeking. And it starts with that coordination meeting to basically lay out the site cleanup list. BWR will have their list. The thing that unites us is the commonality of our scientific research understanding. And that's currently what we're working on. As you can see, John has already identified areas that will be affected. RCs, cleanup numbers, just from the MCP standpoint, and also the imminent hazard values will be impacted. Likewise, specific to existing updating, specific to guidance that currently exists, sampling analysis guide, methodologies, the CAM protocol is needed. So there's a lot of work. And our message is for LSPs and anybody who's out there regulated through the auspices of the 21E program and the MCP. Whatever you do, please try to start thinking about what if these numbers were here today, so that you can get in front of protecting human health and the environment. Just, again, not legally enforceable, because what we have on the books is right now what's legal. But down the road, I think it just would pay dividends to start thinking about where EPA has already gone and where delegated states need to go, which is at least meet or beat those numbers. So we have a coordination meeting in a month. That's the first step to kind of harmonizing our conversation, understanding whether there is, who's going to be on first. And recall that that's exactly what happened back in 2019. The cleanup program went ahead and then followed by the drinking water program. In this case, we have this federal law. The drinking water is responding, but nothing says that we can't go ahead with our plans. And I think what we should probably do is, the next prompt here is for next site cleanup meetings. Perhaps we can start this dialogue through the office hours, basically talking about pieces of the Q&A for PFAS and getting input, public input. Also, you can always email John, and we have a roll-up. We have a whole bunch of questions, again, both internally for program implementation and then externally for regulatory interpretation. We will happily start rolling out these questions and answers through the office hours, and maybe use the Site Cleanup Advisory Committee a segment of that meeting to provide a recap of what has been discussed in the office hours. So that way we're not waiting the next quarter, until one quarter to kind of start talking about these questions. So we can kind of keep it on a rolling basis. And, there might be answers that actually don't cut it when it comes to your work, your craft, you're seeing things in the field that we might not be seeing. So that's just a proposal to kind of keep this topic alive and fresh and, fortified on a monthly basis. And I just wanted, I believe there was a question that was identified by an advisory member. I want to say Ms. Cajigas, and I think she represents the drinking water sector. So I don't know if she's present today. I'm sorry, I don't have the ability to see everyone here, but her question spoke about how the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup is responding to the presence of PFAS in public water supplies, and what are we doing to assist the public water suppliers, with potential source identification. I can definitely tell you from my experience as, former regional director in the Southeast region, and I know this is happening across all of the regions. The drinking water section chief would actually raise concerns, questions, and definitely information to both the deputy regional director of the Bureau of Water Resources and also the regional director. And at that moment, whenever we saw that there was any kind of exceedance of the MassDEP MCL, the time the 20 PFAS, 20 PPT for 6 PFAS. That would be the signal for BWSC to provide site discovery assistance. I know that there are a lot of site discovery projects that are happening across the Commonwealth, and in most cases, the intention there is to identify potential responsible parties so that we can best assist with significant just responsibility, shifting the responsibility, or at least identifying potential parties that can jump in and assist with ongoing response actions, in this case, treatment at the public water supply locations. So we are not backing out from our promise. We continue to deploy our site cleanup staff, and the technical financial support group has been super busy, not only funding, authorizing our funding of monies for site discovery, source discovery, but also when we are discovering potential sources in the process or affected locations, such as contamination that comes to be located in private wells, and there's no potential responsible party, then for providing the bottled water, and in a progressive step also looking into the POET system and maintenance. So we are really here to support clean water. That's really, and also in the process to also identify parties that can come to the fold and take on the response actions.